Thank you very much. And now I would request my co-host to kindly take note.
Yes, thank you, Sumit. Thanks a lot. For the session today, we have two personalities who actively contribute to reputed tax journals and hold expertise in taxation laws. They are none other than Ms. Asmi Mangla, Managing Associate, and Ms. Rubal Vareja, Associate at Nitya Tax Associates. Asmi ma'am holds a bachelor's degree in commerce and law with over 5 years of experience in advising clients across various sectors, including automobile, FMCG, consumer durables, pharmaceuticals, hospitality, information technology, and many more. Ma'am is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountant of India and regularly speaks at seminars, webinars, and client sessions on various indirect issues. Ma'am, we are truly elated to have you with us. Our second guest speaker for today's evening is Ms. Rubal Ma'am. She holds a BA LLB honors degree from Institute of Law Nirma University and is member of Bar of Council of Delhi with an year experience in working with clients across various sectors including automobile, engineering, sugar, cement and others. Ma'am is engaged in trainings and is a frequent speaker at various update sessions for clients. We are delighted to host you, ma'am. Without further ado, I now request Asmi ma'am and Rubal ma'am to kindly enlighten us and walk us through their article, A Critical Analysis of VKC Footsteps Ruling and Constitutional Paradigm of Taxation Statutes. I also request all the participants to kindly post their questions in the chat box if there are any, and we'll take them at the end of the session.
Yeah.
Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sana, Sameer, and Supriya for having us. It's indeed a great pleasure to serve you all with our knowledge. And I hope everyone who has joined has read or gone through the ruling VKC footsteps, and we will be able to address all the questions or doubts they have on the judgment. So we'll be taking the session in a very brief manner. As I understand, we'll be completing it in 15 to 20 minutes, and we'll give more time to the questions and doubts. So I understand you guys would have read our article. So in that manner only we'll proceed. We'll firstly tell what is the issue under GST, inverted duty, what it is all about, why it is there, what was the need to have it, and what was the anomaly, and why this judgment of Supreme Court is making so chaos in the industry. So that is how we'll proceed, and we'll tell the problems and loopholes in the judgment, and then we'll leave it on the audience to ask their questions, right? So my colleague Rubal will be taking it up, and I'll be adding on if there is any need. Yeah, Rubal, you can proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Asmi. I'm just presenting my screen. I hope everybody is able to see it. Yeah, so before moving on to the judgment, the analysis of the judgment, let's quickly understand the background behind the dispute. So for that, we'll first understand what is inverted duty structure. So if you had read our article, you must already know that the inverted duty structure is a transaction in which if I'm a supplier and if I am procuring any goods and services to manufacture or to produce my final product, and I am paying higher rate of tax on those procurements, and ultimately if I am producing a final product which has a lesser rate of tax designated to it, so essentially the result of this transaction becomes that I have more credit accumulated in my pocket than my output tax liability. So my output tax liability is relatively lesser and my credit on this transaction is more. So every time I procure these products and produce more, what I'm stuck with is an accumulated credit, which I cannot utilize. Now, this problem was very well recognized by the government and they provided a solution for it. So the solution was in form of a provision for refund. So for that, we'll first understand what this legal provision talked about. So section 54(3) of the CGST Act, it essentially says that if there is any registered person they can claim refund of any unutilized ITC. However, there is a proviso attached with this substantive provision. The proviso states that provided that no refund of unutilized ITC shall be allowed in cases other than. So one case is our case, which is inverted duty structure, wherein there is credit accumulated on account of higher rate of inputs and higher rate of inputs, and there is lower rate of tax on output supplies. The second case, which we have not mentioned here, is for exporters. So even exporters are allowed to claim refund of any unutilized ITC as well. Now, the corresponding rule to this provision provides a formula through which you can calculate the refund of any unutilized ITC. However, the ultimate effect of this rule is that the refund is only provided basis any input tax credit which was availed on inputs. So let me stop here and once clarify that, as you know, we as a supplier, we use many goods and services as input goods or input services in order to produce any final product. So in this case, what the Rule 89 has done here has restricted the refund only to the ITC which was accumulated on account of input goods and has ignored the ITC for input services. So this was essentially the dispute in VKC footsteps as well, that since the taxpayers were contending that no, we are eligible to refund of input tax credit even for our input services, and not only the input tax credit account on the account of input goods. So this dispute arose, and as usual, it went to high courts. So it went to two high courts. First high court was Gujarat High Court, and second was Madras High Court. So Gujarat High Court ruled in favor of the taxpayer and said that okay, even input tax services should be considered, and the refund will be granted in basis input tax services as well. But Madras High Court ruled in favor of the department and said that no, the provision of refund should be read into plain terms, and only the refund should be allowed on unutilized ITC of input goods only. So after that, this matter reached the Supreme Court. The so we'll first only discuss what the Supreme Court has held, and then we will, as Asmi mentioned, we will critically analyze like what is our view on those grounds and the points, the reasons that the court has given. So the Supreme Court essentially held that the Madras High Court judgment is valid. So they upheld the Madras High Court judgment which favored the department in this case. Secondly, they said that Section 54(3) should be read in plain terms. So Section 54, as per the court's interpretation, Section 54(3) only allows refund basis the unutilized ITC of input goods only, and not the input services. So as per the court's observation, 54(3) itself had put a restriction on the grant of refund, and the proviso that we just read was not a condition of eligibility. It was a restriction on the grant of refund. Further, the court stated that if we read the term inputs as inclusive of input services, then more benefit would be entitled than the legislature intended in the first place. Lastly, it stated that the rule-making authority has very well within the powers, and they are consistent with the parent enactment. Now, moving on to the analysis of this judgment. There were many grounds that were used in this judgment by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has independently answered to all the contentions of the department and the assessee in this case. So the first ground that we are critically analyzing is legislature's discretion in fiscal laws. So as you remember in the start, I mentioned that there are two categories of people to which this refund is granted to. One is exporter and another is domestic supplier, which has inverted. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Just to make it more interactive, I just wanted that before we make it we critically analyze it. Let's keep the provision at in front of audience and let them interpret it whether what they feel out of the plain reading, that it should be allowed on inputs and input services both, or only on inputs. Then they would.
I'll just project the provision again.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So if you see 1543, section 1543, that is the substantive provision which says that as it is written, so this is the verbatim rule we have extracted. So you can go by this language. It says that registered person may claim refund of any unutilized input tax credit. This is the main provision, and then the proviso, which is creating a condition or a qualification or a restriction that you guys can decide what it is creating. The proviso says that provided that no refund of unutilized input tax rate shall be allowed in cases other than where credit is accumulated on account of higher rate of tax on inputs as compared to output supplies. So, I want to ask you all, by reading this provision, what do you feel that this proviso is creating a restriction that credit is only refund is available only on the ITC of inputs, or it is just telling a scenario that where the rate on inputs is higher than rate on outputs, then refund will be allowed. So, any one of you can make an attempt. Is my question clear, Supriya or Samir?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. It is clear.
If in 30 seconds people don't reply, what we internally follow is we start picking people. Can we do that here also?
Anyone can attempt to answer. It doesn't have to be right. So
Doesn't have to. It's just that you will be able to understand it better if you try to attempt it.
If there's nobody from the participants, may I have the discretion to attempt it?
Sure.
Yeah. So the very fact that there's a comparison being made in the last paragraph, where it is stated that the rate of tax on input being higher than the rate of tax on output supplies, there's a clear distinction between inputs and outputs. So I think it is trying to point out at value added. So I think goods are the only material on which value can be added. So precisely the provision or the benefit is applicable only to the unutilized input tax credit on goods.
Okay, sure. Fine. Rubal, you can go ahead now and explain.
So let me Okay, so we have one answer here. Let's keep it in the background of our minds and then let's move on with our discussion. So we will ultimately come to this and then we will again ask you this question, what do you think about it? But before that, let's just analyze the grounds that the court has used in reasoning of this whole judgment. So the first ground was legislature's discretion in fiscal laws. So as I mentioned, there were two categories of people who are given or who are eligible for the grant of this refund. One is exporter and another are suppliers who are who have the inverted duty structure in their transactions, in their day-to-day transactions. Now, the assessee's contention here was that in case of exporters, the refund for input goods as well as input services is allowed. But when it comes to domestic suppliers with people who have inverted duty structure, in their case, only refund on your unutilized ITC of goods is granted. So they established a distinction between these two classes, and then they said that you cannot differentiate between two classes in a same legislation and provide different refunds to one, like different refund to first class and different refund to second class. So this was the primary contention of the SSC in this case. So moving on with this argument, the court has held that, see, in fiscal laws are on a different footing when it comes to testing the constitutionality basis our right to equality that has been given in Article 14. So as we see, we all are aware that we test the arbitrariness of all sorts of legislations time and again. It has been a historical evidence that all the laws are tested on the touchstone of Article 14. Whenever there is any vagueness, whenever there is any arbitrariness. But when it comes to taxation statutes specifically, taxation statutes have greater latitude than other laws because of the highly complex nature. So as you see, in one piece of legislation, the legislature has to answer many independent questions, has to assign different rates of tax, exemptions, etc. And it is impossible to have an abstract symmetry when it comes to different classes of people. So when we are talking about taxation statutes, the judicial trend has always been as such that the judiciary has taken a pragmatic approach, it has taken a solution-based approach, and it has restrained itself not to intervene in the fiscal matters. So even in this case, what the court has done, they have said that this provision has been laid down. The legislature had the power to lay down this provision, and if we intervene and construct or expand the horizon of this refund provision, then that will be unfair. So first ground was that, which we completely are aligned with, that legislature had the power of making any sort of refund provisions, provide refund, like lesser refund to one class or more refund to a different class. So we are aligned with the court's observation in this in this point. Secondly, moving on to the nature of refund. So what is the nature of refund? Is it a constitutional guarantee? Is it a statutory right? Where does it come from? What is its validity? Can I say that, can I like ask for the right for a refund as a matter of my fundamental right or as a constitutional right? So no, refund has no constitutional guarantee. Refunds are basically akin to concessions, various exemptions that you must have read time and again, that there are this type of exemptions allowed to this type of suppliers. So all those things are akin to refund. Now refund is only regulated, and all the power to grant refund comes from the parent statute only. So whenever we ask for refund as a right, what we have to consider is that what is written in the parent statute and the corresponding rules that are therewith, and then calculate it and then ask for it, claim for it. Next ground was related to proviso of section 54.3. This was the most debatable ground, that whether it was a restriction or a qualification. So as we saw that there was one answer attempted. Asmi, do you want to add something to it at this point, or should I move on with this?
No, you move on. You will explain, and if I feel, I'll add. Yeah.
Yeah. So should we skip back to section 54.3 and then discuss it? It will be better, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we can present the provision.
So section 54.3, as we see, there is this proviso. The proviso says that no refund of unutilized input tax credit shall be allowed in cases other than one of the cases is where credit accumulated on account of rate of tax on inputs being higher than rate of tax of output supplies. So the department's contention was that this proviso creates a restriction in itself on the substantive provision and only allows the grant of refund of unutilized credit on inputs. However, The different set of interpretation available for this proviso is that provisos are not only to create restriction on the substantive provision. Provisos come in various varieties and natures, and provisos can sometimes also create a condition of eligibility. So if I read this from the very start, from the top, if I start reading, it says that registered person may claim refund of any unutilized ITC. So the substantive provision itself is telling me that registered person can take refund of any. So the quantum of refund is herein said that you can have any unutilized ITC. However, the proviso comes in and tells me that in what cases I become eligible for the grant or for the claim of this refund. So if I'm using three things, I'm using two goods and one service to make my ultimate product, and one of them has a higher rate of tax than my ultimate product, my output supply, then I become eligible. My interpretation is I become eligible to claim refund of any unutilized ITC that I may have in my pocket at that point of time. So this is a interpretation which says that this proviso is merely a condition of eligibility and it is not a restriction.
So the important words herein where we need to focus is, first of all, as Rubal highlighted, any unutilized input tax credit. So any itself indicates that the entire pool of credit that you have accumulated in your electronic credit ledger, so that the entire pool is eligible to be refunded. Now, when we go to the proviso, the words that are relevant are in cases other than. So they are telling the cases, the scenarios wherein you will be eligible for refund. If they would have written that provided that no refund would be allowed other than on inputs, if the cases word was missing and they would have said that no refund would be allowed other than input goods, then it would have been fine that input services refund is not allowed. But they are only telling a case wherein refund would be allowed. So case is where rate is higher, rate of input is higher than the rate on output. So this is a case. Once we satisfy this scenario that our rate on input is higher than the rate of output, we fall into this eligibility criteria, we will get refund. Now, how much refund we'll get? For that, the main provision says any unutilized ITC, whatever is unutilized, you'll get refund of it. Now, once we have fallen into the eligibility, we will have to go to the formula prescribed under rules. Now, the formula restricts it to inputs. Formula itself says that you only will get a refund of inputs and not input services. Now the question is, when the main provision is not restricting my refund to inputs, can rules do that? Do we have rules have that power to restrict the credit from the substantive provision? Can delegated legislation restrict or go beyond the main statute? So that is our next point that Rubal will discuss. So Sameer, as you attempted, so now do you feel when we have highlighted the expressions that are used that the provision is not restricting to inputs only and it's just the rule that is restricting?
Yes, ma'am, definitely. It is much more clearer now that the rule is the one which is creating a limitation. Yes.
Right. Yeah, Rubal, you can proceed now.
So now that we've interpreted the provision 54.3 and its proviso, let's look at what the rule has done. Correct? So the rule gives us a formula which has the ultimate effect that my refund will only be basis my input unutilized input tax credit on my input goods and not input services. So can a delegated legislation do that? If my substantive provision is providing something in four corners, can my delegated legislation go outside those four corners and establish a different substantive provision that did not exist in the enabling act in the first place? So as we know that delegated legislations cannot do that, their rule making power is limited to what has only been given in the enabling act, and it cannot transgress on those provisions and go outside, even restrict them as well. In this case, like this case has done in Rule 89.5 has restricted the scope of Section 54.3. So simply the executive herein has gone beyond the authority of the original rule-making power and overridden the provisions of the Enabling Act, and essentially defeated the purpose of the grant of refund that was first like provided in Section 54.3. What the object of the refund? That is our analysis. So anybody would like to comment at this point or say anything or add anything?
I think nobody has anything to add, so I'll just proceed. So thank you, Rubal ma'am, and thank you, Asmi ma'am, for such an articulate and riveting speech. It was indeed an insightful session, and I'm sure it was a great learning experience for all of us who are attending the webinar today. So now I'll be taking the questions, and anybody who has any questions can post it in the chat box if they haven't already posted it. So the first question for this evening is, could you please throw some light on the judicial review of fiscal laws, especially taxing statutes?
Yeah, so see, as I already mentioned, when it comes to taxation statutes, they are always on a different footing than other laws which essentially touch upon the civil rights. It is because of the complexity of these laws, and it is because even the legislature cannot be expected to make uniform laws for every class of people that are concerned, because taxation statutes are something that if a diverse range of population and the subject is like very diverse. So in that case, when we talk about judicial review of taxation statutes, we can say, yeah, a little bit liberty has been given to the legislature, and this has also been acknowledged by judiciary itself, and they also, like they also have a controlled approach when they come to review of fiscal statutes.
And also for the reason that taxation statutes are made more on logical and practical solution based approach. So it's more like representations are received from the industry that how things should be designed. So regular and frequent amendments are there to cater to the interest of the industry and to solve the problems. So that is why it has been left on the legislature to design the manner and how they want to, if they want to restrict something or if they want to allow something. So that discretion has been given by the judiciary, and they don't get into much unless and until something is completely unconstitutional and going against the public interest, then only they intervene, otherwise they do not.
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am, for the answer. The next question is, in your opinion, is the judicial pronouncement of VKC footsteps an admirable move of the judiciary?
To some extent, yes, as we mostly agree with court's observation in most of the points that we have highlighted. However, there is this one pickle here that about the interpretation of proviso here, and that I think that we do not agree with, and that has affected a lot of industries after the judgment has come. So that we could have some reservations for the interpretation of the proviso.
So basically on the legal grounds, they have given good detailed judgment that people can refer for constitutionality, delegated legislation. It's a good detailed research that has been gone into the judgment. But however, on the conclusion part, we do not agree on the conclusion part because they've not read the provision correctly in our view.
Thank you, ma'am. So the next question is there any other alternative solution apart from judicial review that may be adopted to make good this constitutional legislation?
Not really. I mean, there is only one way. If the legislature could provide a clarificatory amendment in this regard, then that would be better, because after the Supreme Court judgment has come, um, there is either it gets appealed to a larger bench, or there is a clarificatory amendment. But a clarificatory amendment would be much helpful to the taxpayer in like in understanding the intention of the legislation in the first place, which the department is trying to establish. But it will be better if we get a clarification in this regard.
Either positive or negative, whatever is the intent, that could be clarified by the government.
Yes, ma'am, I totally agree. Clarificatory amendment would be beneficial. So the next question that we have is, could you please explain the concept of the inverted duty structure using a hypothetical example?
That's me. I think you should answer that.
Yeah, sure. So basically, if we see what all industries are facing this issue, I can give example. One is ink industry and one is tractor industry. So what happens is that their raw material. So if we talk about tractor, so their raw materials are tire, batteries, and all those stuff. So all those attract 18% or 28% GST. However, their final product, tractor, that attracts 12% GST, right? So what happens is their major input services are 18 or 28%. So there is a credit accumulation because they are paying 18 and 28 GST and they are discharging only 12 rupees of GST. So all that GST that they are paying on the inward side is accumulating and accumulating, and so that is becoming a cost in the system. Cost in a sense because they have to pay cash on the outward side. They pay 12% GST out of the credit, but then the extra GST that they are paying, that is getting accumulated and they are unable to materialize it. So that is why these refund provisions are there, so that they can get cash out of it. Whatever is accumulating, they can transmit into cash refund. However, as Rubal highlighted throughout, that because the refund is only allowed on inputs as per the Supreme Court judgment, and input services is not allowed. So whatever credit is accumulating out of input services. So let's suppose your tire is attracting 18% and your tractor is 12%. So you are getting the refund of rupees 6, right? But now input services are also like you are using a rented office, a rented premises. So you're paying 18% GST. You are using telephone services, electricity. Electricity is exempt, but otherwise, there are many other services that you are using in producing a product. So all those are also attracting 18% GST, but that is not included in the refund thing. So all that credit is getting accumulated. So that is the entire dispute, and for this only the taxpayer was fighting that for that input services also the refund should be allowed, because logically the entire intent of these refund provisions was that taxpayer should not suffer issue because of the GST rates decided by the council. So if it's his output is lesser, so he should not is attracting lesser rates, so he should not suffer and he should get the refund. But even after providing the formula, if the complete solution is not being given to the taxpayer, so for that only they reach to the High Court, Supreme Court. But unfortunately, the answer is negative. But if we see the logic as well as the intent behind this provision, so definitely input services credit should refund should be allowed.
Thank you so much. Yes, somebody has a question. Yes, Achinta, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the presentation. I just have a concern. I haven't read the case in its entirety, but I do believe it's a very well-written judgment by Justice Chandrachud. And on the part where, where you very adroitly mentioned that a refund is not a constitutional right, of course. Now, looking at a country like the US of A, if there is an unconstitutional tax and it hits the commerce clause, the court says, all right, you'll get a refund. Now, what I didn't like particularly about the judgment was Justice Chandrachud simply mentioned the Mafatlal judgment and said, oh, as per the 9 by judgment, it's not, even if it's unconstitutional levy of tax, refund is not a matter of right. So I just wanted your opinion. When the government is unjustly enriched, does it not become the duty to sort of give back that particular tax, regardless if the assessee knows it or not? Because looking at it from a very economic perspective, we remain a rather poor country, and people are not as well read in comparison to, let's say, the USFA, the England, the United Kingdom, or Canada. So, what do you think is the stance of both the government and, secondly, the courts when they say, well, it's not a constitutional right, and it's only when the assessee says, if you claim it, we'll give it to you, otherwise, well, too bad.
So thank you, Achinta, for the question. Basically, the court is not saying that only if you claim it, we'll give it. What the court is saying is that legislature has the discretion as to what to give to the taxpayer. So legislature could very well decide that they don't want to refund this credit at all. Leave it input or input services. They decided that we don't want to give this refund. In that case, also a taxpayer cannot challenge it, because all these concessions, these benefits, incentives, and even allowing credit, input tax credit to a taxpayer, it's itself a concession and a discretion at the legislature's end that they are giving this benefit, because they have entire power to tax anything, and after taxing anything, if they want to give any additional benefits, whether to allow a credit or to grant a refund, they are doing in the public interest, but they are not bound by it. They are not it's not their duty to give you credit. So to that extent, court is right, and it has been upheld by many courts, Supreme Court as well as High Courts, that in case of taxation statutes, legislature has discretion, and for that matter, these refunds and concession kind of things, that's not a constitutional guarantee for sure. That's a legislature's discretion to grant it or not. So it's not that if you claim it, we'll give it. It's more of that they can decide whether to give, whether to make a provision to allow it or not. Once they have made the provision, of course they are bound to give it. But what provision they are making, that they have the right to.
Thank you so much. Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was very helpful. The next question that we have is the interaction between section 54(3) read with Rule 89 and Article 14 of the Constitution is examined in the article. Do you think the taxing statutes, due to their inherent characteristics, fall under the purview of intelligible differentia for the purpose of Article 14?
Yeah, definitely. So they do. The intelligible differentia is essentially having a logic behind this differentiation among two classes. So right to equality does not, so just because a legislation makes a differentiation, that is not enough to say that, okay, this is in violation of right to equality, because the right to equality is subject to the doctrine of reasonable classification. So if a law is fulfilling that, and so usually what happens is that the taxation statutes are enacted after a lot of empirical research. There is a lot of logic, as even Asmi has mentioned before. The taxation statutes are very pragmatic, and there is a lot of logic behind it. So definitely, in when we come to intelligible differentia, there is even in this case there is intelligible differentia, because the legislature can decide or cannot. They have the power to say, okay, I will give refund for this thing, and I will not give refund for this thing. They have very well enumerated all the reasons as well, if you would go through department's contentions. So yeah, in this case, the want of intelligible differentia was very well satisfied by the provisions. So we cannot challenge that basis that.
And the reasons for this differentiation, one of the basic reason of this differentiation was that goods are tangible, and you can identify, like, these goods have been used to produce this output good. So if tires are procured, these have gone into the manufacture of the tractor, right? So those are tangible, and you can easily establish the nexus between the both. As far as input services are concerned, whether you have used those services, whether they've gone into the, and how much proportion of those services have gone into the manufacturing of a output product. So the nexus is not that simple and straight, and the authorities will have to go into the details, whether the portion is correct or not. So to avoid all that dispute and to avoid the fake refunds, because if you would have heard that even right now many fake refunds are being claimed in case of exports, and authorities are taking it up very strictly and stringently, that because they are simply camouflaging the transactions and showing that they are making exports and actually they are not. So to avoid all that thing in inverted UD structure, they have this intent to keep it simple, which can be very well verified by the authorities. So that is why input services, they had the so intelligible differentiate is very much satisfied in this case.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the answer. I would now request Samir to take up the next set of questions, please.
Thank you. Uh, the next question is, will the interpretation of the term refund in the judgment form a basis for more litigation in the near future?
It may or may not, because refunds have been interpreted to be similar to. So these are basically beneficial provisions that a legislature enacts in form of a legislation. So the court has also stated that refund is a kind of a concession. It's like a benefit that the legislature provided, and the legislature had the authority to restrict it or not restrict it. So the interpretation is fine in the case of VKC footsteps, and that has been the interpretation so far. Like, if you also examine the historical background behind the nature of refund, you will also realize that okay, it's not very. It's you cannot ask it as a matter of right. You can only, this is only a benefit if it's given in the law. You can get it. If it's not provided in the law, you cannot say that okay, just because I'm going through a economic hardship, I should be allowed this refund.
So, Samir, the crux would be that this judgment has not given any new definition to refund. I would say what they have held has been held, is the history also. So, as Rubal said that previously also all the courts, the settled jurisprudence in respect of refund is that that is a concession kind of thing, and the court has the discretion. It's not a constitutional right. So what they have done is limited to only interpretation of a particular provision. So that limited provision they have interpreted incorrectly. So that will not create much of litigation on other refund things. This will be limited to this particular provision only. Otherwise, what they have held in the judgment in respect of legal thing or constitutional thing, that has been a settled jurisprudence only, nothing new.
Right, definitely. Thank you very much. The next question is, would you like to comment on the critical role of delegated legislation in tax laws? Could these authorities play any significant part in reducing differences between the Act and the rules, and in turn reducing unwarranted litigation?
Yeah, ideally they should. I mean, ideally, when we talk about delegated legislation, it has to be within the power that has been conferred by the Enabling Act itself. So, if the authorities are going beyond that, then that is something unusual that they are doing. Their role is to stick with what the Enabling Act says and make rules accordingly and not go beyond it. So, yeah, if in a ideal scenario, if we talk about it, then yes, the authorities could make a change and they could reduce the quantum of litigation that has come through because of this mismatch in Enabling Act and rules. But whether that will happen or not, that is a different question altogether.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. Um, It is an established principle that tax laws, above all laws, cannot have a retrospective effect. However, considering the practical situation and the functioning of the tax department, whether the refund applications that are already sanctioned have any negative impact and give rise to any more disputes.
So this is not a retrospective amendment per se in this case. This is just a interpretation of Supreme Court. The provision has been there since the implementation of GST regime. So since 1st July 2017, the provision is same. It's just the interpretation that court has taken. So this will not affect the past sanctioned refunds. Even if the department tries to use the Supreme Court judgment and questions the refunds granted, the already granted refunds, then the taxpayers have enough legal grounds to challenge them, because the already granted refund and the sanctioned refund could only be challenged basis a retrospective amendment. A Supreme Court order cannot cannot put the question, because a taxpayer can say that when I applied for the refund, the provision was in front of you. If you had any doubt regarding the eligibility of refund that I've claimed, then you could have very well pointed out at that time. You could have raised the deficiency, you could have rejected the refund. But if once you have sanctioned it, unless and until a new fact or thing comes up in your knowledge, then only you can challenge the already granted refund. And also practically, if I tell what was happening is nobody was actually claiming refund of input services, because there was always a dispute going on, and department's view was that only inputs refund is allowed. So industry was only claiming refund of inputs. So not much on the that ways the granted refunds there would be any litigation.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, ma'am. The last question from my side would be, I believe you've already covered this aspect, but which sectors will be majorly affected by this decision of Honorable Supreme Court, and what steps must these businesses take to face the least amount of heat?
Yeah, so basically, as I highlighted, tractor industry is one major industry that is being affected. Second is ink industry, the paper ink that the one who manufactures. And third, I would say solar power generators industry. So solar power generators attract 5% GST, and their inputs or inward supplies could attract higher rate. So all these industries would be affected by this. Other examples that have inverted duty structures are railway industry and apparel industry, but therein already the inverted duty fund is not allowed. So they were already suffering not just input services, but input refund was also not allowed. So they will not be affected, because recently one thing is that they were never allowed refund, and second thing is that recently in 45th GST Council meeting, so what they have done is that they have solved the issue of inverted duty for these two sectors. So they will not be affected. Only the ones I mentioned, tractor, ink, solar power plants, and some more, they would be affected. And what best they can do is they can continue filing refund for inputs only, because if they file refund for input services, that would be that would not be accepted by the department, and then there'll be a whole lot of litigation through around it. So, or if the quantum is much and they want to liquidate their credit, they can file the representation, they can file a writ, and try to have a positive case for them. That one.
Right. Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Uh, Considering we have to finish this seminar within time, I'll just have one more question, which is already mentioned by a participant in the chat box. The question is a twofold question. The first part being, could you please clarify how the proviso to the provision is merely prescribing a qualification criteria and not creating a restriction? The second fold of this question is also, according to the discussion and the presentation, why does the revenue want to impose such a restriction?
Okay, so both the parts have already been taken. First part I have explained in detail when we read the provision and we asked you, Samir, and then we clarified. So I think first part is done. Second part, according to us, why does the revenue want to impose such a restriction? Again, as I mentioned, that the reason they have is tangibility and intangibility point that is mentioned in one of their what there was some document only wherein they have mentioned GST Council discussions. It has been mentioned that the reason basically is to restrict fraud refund claims and to restrict the calculation and working of the department and to have a seamless flow that okay, these inputs are used and these are being refunded. So they don't want to have extra pressure and to decide whether input services are gone into it or not and how much proportion is gone into it. So just to avoid all that dispute and to minimize the fraud refund claims, they want to impose this restriction.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for answering all these questions in such detail. And considering the paucity of time, I would now end the question and answer session over here. Over to you, Supriya.
Thank you, Samir. So thank you so much, ma'am, Asmi ma'am and Rubal ma'am. I'm sure this has brought much more clarity to all of us on this topic. And I take this opportunity to thank Asmi ma'am and Rubal ma'am and express my kind gratitude on behalf of CCIT for accepting our invitation to address this session. We strongly look forward to having both of you again with us, ma'am. And without failing to mention, I would also like to thank all the participants who have joined this session, without whom this webinar would not have been a successful one. And on behalf of CCIT, I assure you that we will continue to strive for knowledge, and in furtherance of the same, we are having other webinars to ameliorate everyone's taxation knowledge and understanding. And we look forward to your continued participation and support. With that, I bring this session to a close. Thank you. Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.